Hoa Nguyen from Black Steel Investment Group. Dr. Nguyen is a practicing optometrist.
My parents are from Vietnam, fled after the war. So I was born in the refugee camp in the Philippines. I migrated around a lot of different states, first up north and went down. I going to 18 different schools. When we came out, we had about over $350,000 of student loan debt combined. We acquired our second practice. The reality of it, we were still working like 70 or 80 hours a week. When my daughter was born, it was a big shift. It was, I became a mom, but I also worked really hard. I wanted to still be a doctor, but I also wanted to have flexibility and joy.
You're an author, you're a mother, you have two practices that you manage, and an investment group. What kind of approach or systems do you have in place to manage all of this?
$50,000. They can have a part ownership of an apartment that's, say, 200 or 300 units of a much nicer asset. I learned, but then I was like, I immediately put our money to work, because otherwise people get analysis paralysis and they don't take action.
I love that term. I love that term. What do you think 2026 is kind of shaping up to be in this asset class?
There are lots of opportunities for investments, especially on properties that came in with bridge debt. You're hosting this, and I think that's great to have a podcast to bring people on to educate.
Right.
And that's so important firsthand.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Dr. Yasser Rodriguez, founder here of Cardia REI Investments, and I have the pleasure of being joined by Dr. Hoa Nguyen from Black Steel Investment Group. So we're kicking off our podcast with a heck of a show for you and a fantastic guest. But just a little background, just because it's our first show over here. The real purpose of this podcast and our group is essentially to target, healthcare professionals and physicians, and really in avenues of building passive wealth, importantly in a tax efficient manner, and with the ultimate goal of financial freedom. So that's the overarching goal of this series is that, and we're going to be inviting a whole series of excellent guests in the near future. So I'm excited, to present to you Dr. Nguyen. So Dr. Nguyen is a practicing optometrist, full time. She, along with her husband, Dr. Jaime Gonzalez, they are both optometrists. They have two very busy, successful practices in the Dallas area. She's a mother, a philanthropist, an Amazon best seller author, and on top of that, she has a fantastic group that her and her husband founded several years ago called Black Steel Investment Group. They've grown to currently have over 7,500 units, which equates to over 640 million under assets under management. So, Dr. Nguyen, thank you, for your time. For the viewers in the future, it's right before Thanksgiving, so that's not lost on us. So huge thank you. But I just, a little introduction about yourself. Kind of give our viewers a little background of your beginnings, how you came to optometry, and so on and so forth.
Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Rodriguez, for having me on. But my little background, my parents are from Vietnam, fled after the war. So I was born in the refugee camp in the Philippines, came to the States when I was close to 9 years old. And, I migrated around a lot of different states, first up north and went down. When people ask me, where are you from? I just say I'm from New Orleans, because I moved so much. I wound up going to 18 different schools.
Oh, wow.
So I learned to adapt really early on, but, because I didn't have a whole lot of verticals, my mom never went to school. And so I saw an opportunity being here in America to really try to do well in school. And so becoming a doctor was one of my dreams. And so I was able to pursue optometry school. I graduated in Tulane in New Orleans, and then I went to Houston for optometry school and met my now husband. We've been together for 20 years. I graduated back in 2006. And it was one of those things. I was like, I wanted to have a bigger mission to serve. And patient care was something I really enjoyed. But the hustle and bustle of even working as an optometrist, when we came out, we had about over $350,000 of student loan debt combined.
Hear you on that one. I hear you on that one.
Yeah. And so coming out, both of us are very humble beginnings.
Right.
And so, but we worked our way up, we had this dream to want to, create a lot of mission work together. And philanthropy was always in our heart to serve. And after 4 years of the hustle and grind of working for someone else, we were able to purchase our first practice here in Dallas. And then 2 years after that, we acquired our second practice. And even though that was our dream to acquire and have our own practices, the reality of it was we were still working like 70 or 80 hours a week. And it was even more work
Yeah,
at
yeah.
our own practices, right? So,
And
um,
having employees, right?
and having employees, and we are not trained as doctors to
Not at
run
all.
businesses, right?
Not at all. Not at all.
But I did grow up really young working. I mean, I started working with my mom in the family business like at age 10, even though it was a different vertical in the restaurant business, I was well versed in service.
Right, 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 right.
And but when my daughter was born, it took us a while to have her. She's now 11. We only have one baby girl, but
Awesome.
it was a big shift. It was, I became a mom, but I also worked really hard. I wanted to still be a doctor, but
Right.
I also wanted to have flexibility and choices. And I said, what else can I do to reduce my work hours and spend more quality time with our daughter? And so I always attribute my real estate journey to the birth of our daughter.
I see.
And
So,
that's when we started looking in avenues and understanding, like, because when my family was like, what do you know about real estate? As a doctor, we don't know much about real estate
not at
investing. We
all.
know about the stock
Not at
market investing because that's all we were taught.
at
At
most,
most, if we
stocks
even
and
know that.
bonds. At most, yes.
At most, right?
Gosh, it's so painful. You're exactly right. But
And
yes,
so the education, it was kind of like starting a whole nother education,
yeah,
right?
different language.
Education on real estate investing and like what do I need to understand before I put my money to work? And so I started off in single family.
Yep.
I started off with Airbnb type
And
properties.
what year, more or less, was this? Because this is
That
already
was in
a year.
2015.
Okay, okay, okay. Very
Yeah,
good.
so 2000, my daughter was born 2014,
Oh,
2015. We did the education for, a year prior to that, and then we started actually investing
gotcha.
in 2015. And then we transitioned into multifamily in 2018.
Okay.
And then 2018 was where we really went all in on one vertical, and multifamily was really the lane we wanted to fully concentrate on just for scalability.
And I
And
think that
that
answers
changed
that
everything.
question. Yes. So you mentioned Airbnbs and single family homes, and either there's a trade-off with like a property management or doing it yourself for better margins. But that's, I mean, you're a full-time clinician, you're a mother. There's only so many hours in the day before you're going to hit a point, you know?
Absolutely. So it was just, it still didn't solve the issue because it was still a lot of our time,
Right.
right? Doing Airbnb, and it's like every little thing. And then we did hire a property management team,
Right.
which they still run it, but still it's pros and cons involved in that. And so I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do fix and flip.
Right.
You know, I just want to be able to scale. And that led us to multifamily syndications.
Awesome. And as far as your pivot, so a lot of people, physicians included, are familiar with the single family homes. It just intuitively kind of makes sense. They are, primary homeowners, so the mechanics of that makes sense. Airbnbs are somewhat similar with some nuances, of course. But how did you then, you mentioned the scalability, but how did you pivot? What education or how did you do it? I mean, how did you pivot from an asset class that is a little easier to understand to something that, at least initially, is a little more intimidating, bigger properties? Now you're talking properties that are usually in the millions, and that's an intimidating kind of figure. So,
Yeah, the biggest thing I went to is I'm a big believer of collapsing time frames and finding the people who were already experienced in the lane and talking to actual investors, going to local meetups, hiring mentors who are like well versed in it, and having a community. And that's the biggest thing, is having a community of the vetted operators and people, and also hearing both the investors, from a passive investor and active operators, because it's all this. If you once you get into this community, it's all about reputation
yeah.
and integrity, because there's a lot of fluff out there in
Oh,
this
yeah.
space. And so that was really important for me, is to, number one, the people, because I always say the underlying thing is not just the money, it's the people who operate and run it, and if it's ethical and does it make sense. And so for me, that was really important, to find a community so that I can get educated and then learn and invest like that.
Okay. Excellent. And you touched already on a couple of topics, but well, for any investor, but for healthcare professionals, physicians, and what have you, why is commercial real estate in particular an attractive asset class?
Yeah, commercial real estate was what I found firsthand, was especially specifically in multifamily apartment communities. It was really good to be able to have, even if it's a small portion. So, say for instance, if an investor were to put hypothetically like $50,000, they can have a part ownership of an apartment that's, say, 200 or 300 units of a much nicer asset. You alone can buy, or we wouldn't want to allocate all our money to one
Right.
project. So it
Right.
divvies up the risk, but it also allows you to buy a much nicer property that can then be in a prime location, that
Right.
can meet the metrics of, having less risk.
Yeah.
And you can be in a nice neighborhood. It's already a cash flowing asset. You can have better debt structure on there. And then property management, when you have more doors, if you have a vacancy and you have a few residents who they're not occupied, it doesn't hit the bottom line. Like if you
Right.
have a single family home, if you have a single family or a duplex and you don't have a tenant,
All or
or
nothing.
it's all or nothing.
All or
Whereas if
nothing.
you have 200 or 300 or even 100 units,
Right.
and say a fraction of them are gone, it doesn't hurt the bottom line as much. And
Right.
so those are big factors in why multifamily is a lot more risk averse.
Yep.
There's still always risk, but when
Sure.
you compare it to a one-on-one single family,
Right.
it makes a whole lot more sense.
Right. And I think most of our community members are used to like a W-2, or if they're a business owner, obviously a little different. But there's obviously different tax treatments, on how the IRS approaches a W-2 paycheck compared to investing, sure, in stocks and bonds and portfolio, et cetera, but also in real estate. From your experience, kind of when you got started and as you've, progressed in your journey there, can you maybe touch on some of the how the income is treated, and from a tax perspective, perhaps like depreciation and different concepts like that?
Yeah, that was one of the biggest things too for us, having practices and wanting to put our money to work. And so when all of these apartment communities, there is it's called a cost segregation study.
Mhm.
And so there's an opportunity to do what's called an accelerated bonus depreciation. And we're able to do that on the first year. So the year that you invest onto the asset. And so if we were to invest 50,000 or $100,000, depending on the project, you can probably depreciate about 70 or 80% of that sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's one portion of it. But then also, when you have cash flow distributions, most projects are held usually about anywhere between 3 to 5 years on most of these commercial real estate assets as an investment. But even if you get cash flow distributions or you get distributions if there's a refinance done, you do not get taxed on those distribution dollars until the asset is sold.
Right.
And then even when the asset is sold, there is a catch up on some of the depreciation on the back end, but you don't get taxed like ordinary income
Right.
on that gain. And
Right.
so there's a lot of tax that comes into play, especially for physicians and high income earners to be able to invest in assets like that. And so that's an extra incentive when we do this type of investment.
Excellent. And to your point, especially if you invest in several projects, usually they're on different timetables. So while one is getting depreciated, the other one, as you mentioned, may get recaptured if the property's sold or whatever. But usually you have this kind of symbiotic or synergistic kind of fugue almost between these different projects. So it's not like you're investing 1 year and you stop there. Next year you do another project and so on and so forth. So it just kind of stacks and it really, amplifies exponentially the whole operation. And again, as I mentioned, you're an author, you're a mother, you have two practices that you manage and an investment group. As far, a lot of our listeners are busy, they have families themselves and all that. What kind of organization or assuming you sleep, of course, what kind of approach or systems do you have in place to manage all of this? Because you're pulled in a lot of different directions. So, from your experience, what have you found the most successful?
I did it in steps. I obviously, the first when I was still working full time, I slowly started as a passive investor only,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so being able to passively invest means that somebody else is doing all the heavy lifting, and that's another big advantage
Right,
is the general partnership team, they're running everything.
right,
So I'm not creating a new job on the investment as a passive investor.
right, right,
Now,
right,
when you go active, that's a whole nother animal,
right,
right?
right.
But that takes some time to really understand and learn the ropes before I was able to transition and lower my hours on the optometry side. So when I was working before, I was doing 5 to 6 days a week. I'm down to 1 day a week now,
Oh,
right?
awesome.
And so I have a lot more flexibility and time. And a few years post COVID, I started cutting down my hours significantly to 2 days a week and then now to 1 day a week. And so it allows me to be able to really concentrate my time and have more flexibility. But even if a physician was working full time,
Hmm.
if they're able to find good operators and a good group that they can, then they do the lifting and vetting
Right,
the operators. So then it doesn't become another job that they have
right,
to add into their busy schedule. And
right.
that's why this model works. In order for people to have more flexibility. And I found other passions of mine to be able to travel the world, take our daughter to do mission work, right? To be
Awesome.
able to speak and do other things that we enjoy. But the real estate vertical was what allowed us to be able to do that, and to
Yep.
free up our time.
No, excellent, excellent. And if you could go back in time, it's currently 2025, your daughter was born in 2014. If you could talk to, the Dr. Wynn of 2015, accumulating all this knowledge, just starting the whole real estate kind of journey, what are maybe two or three concrete kind of actionable things that can get a person started?
Yeah. So I always say educating first, but the problem with education is a lot of people just educate, learn, and don't take action.
Right.
Right. And so there is understanding. I find that the education, if you can actually have a local Eventbrite, usually if you look up, meetups, they have a lot of actual in-person meetups. Before you go to the meetups, I would advise like going to learn, and you can read some of the books like from Joe Fairless, and you can see just learning how multifamily syndications or investing in general. And so you can learn some of that. Bigger Pockets is a community that you can learn that's online. So there are a lot of free resources where
Yeah.
you can ask direct questions. And then also, but you do have to be careful the type of feedback and things you get on just online. I find the best information you can get is listening to actual operators, actual people who have done and have a good track record.
Mhm.
Old Capital is a blending. They're more a mortgage broker, but
Yeah.
they do have an Old Capital podcast. They bring on a lot of general partners. They teach you on debt structure because that's something I find is super important is understanding the debt side of the commercial investing space, which most people do not understand. And so I think investors need to be able to understand that really well.
And Dr. Nguyen, so last question perhaps. Where do you see, a lot of changes in the last couple months, but if you had to look into a crystal ball, what do you think 2026 is kind of shaping up to be in this asset class?
It's been a little tricky the past few years, to be honest, with the interest rates, increasing a lot. I think so moving forward, there are lots of opportunities for investments, especially on properties that came in with bridge debt, and bridge debt are short terms and they're now coming due. And those are opportunities where you can buy on a discount now. And so, 20% is not uncommon, 20 to 30% on properties that have to be sold right
Yeah.
now. So I think 2026 is in time for smart operators that have already been in the game and have connections to have good buying opportunity. And so physicians, if they're aligned and ready to they get their education, get to meet some people and be able to like, you're hosting this. And I think that's great to have a podcast to bring people on to educate. And
Right.
that's so important firsthand. And I think that's a big thing is get out there, learn, listen to these educational podcasts. And then when the opportunities start taking action, because that's what I did was like, I learned, but then I was like, I immediately put our money to work because otherwise people get analysis paralysis and they don't take
I love
action.
that term. I love that term. And when you kind of invest, same deal with me. My first deal, I was a limited partner and I invested. You start paying attention because now it matters. Whether it's 50,000 or whatever it is, that's a lot of money, and you worked hard for that money. So you
Yeah.
now have skin in the game.
That is one of the best education is when you
Yeah.
become a limited partner,
Uh-huh.
hands on. All the books out there and all the
Yep.
podcasts, all the meetups will not give you the education as your
Nope.
first investment.
Nope, you are paying attention. You are looking at every line, and it is a massive accelerator. But no, Dr. Nguyen, so huge, huge thank you, for your time. Again, the evening before Thanksgiving, no less. But we sincerely appreciate it. To say you have an impressive journey is the biggest understatement. Sincere respect. And again, her and her husband, Dr. Jaime Gonzalez, the founders of Black Steel Investment Group. And thanks again. Thank you for your time, and thanks
Thank
for
you.
imparting your wisdom on our team there. So,
Thank you so much and happy Thanksgiving.
okay. Well, thank you.